I still remember that morning in the backwoods of Texas like it was yesterday. It is the kind of memory that crawls into your dreams and shakes you awake at night. What started as a plain old hunting trip with a good friend of mine, a police officer from our town, turned into something I never could have imagined. We picked a section of public land we had hunted before. It was wild country, miles of thick brush and tall pines, with no roads or houses anywhere close. Folks said it was good land for deer, and they were right about that, but it was also lonely ground where you felt small, like the trees were keeping secrets. We rolled up while the stars were still out, parked the truck along a dirt path, and hiked in with our packs. We were dressed head to toe in ghillie suits, the kind that make you blend right into the undergrowth. Once we found a decent clearing, we climbed into our tripod stands, maybe 20 yards apart, just high enough to see over the brush. Our bows were set across our laps, and our pistols stayed holstered at our sides, since we both had the permits to carry. The plan was simple: wait for daylight, keep quiet, and hope a buck wandered by. For the first stretch, everything felt peaceful. The birds started their morning chatter, and the woods slowly came alive with the sound of critters moving about. But then I caught something different. It was not the soft step of a deer or the flutter of a bird. This was heavier, slow, deliberate crunches like boots pressing down on brittle leaves. I froze in my stand, every nerve on alert, and tilted my head to listen. The sound drew closer from behind me, steady and unhurried. Through a slit in my suit, I saw him. A man, maybe in his 40s, rough-looking with a tangled beard and a jacket that had seen better days. A bolt-action rifle was slung over one shoulder, and a cigarette glowed between his fingers, the smoke curling in the pale morning light. He moved like he belonged there, calm as could be, eyes sweeping the ground as if he were following tracks. But rifle season was still a ways off, which meant he had no business carrying that gun. Right then, I figured he was poaching, and my stomach tightened. Out there on public land, you come across all sorts of people. Most are harmless, but now and then, you meet one who is not. I decided to sit still, let him pass and avoid any trouble. Only he did not pass. He came straight toward me. Before I knew it, he stopped right at the base of my stand, not more than 10 feet away. Up close, I could see the hollowness in his eyes, like he had not slept properly in weeks. His lips moved in low mutters, words I could not make out. Then he raised his rifle and peered into the brush like he was waiting for something. My chest pounded. Something about the way he handled that gun made me uneasy. I decided it was better to speak than to keep hiding, so I slowly pulled off my head covering and cleared my throat. "Morning," I called down, keeping my voice calm. "You out here hunting too?" His head jerked up, and the look on his face turned mean quick. In one sharp motion, he swung the rifle up and leveled it right at me. The dark barrel pointed straight at my chest, and my breath caught. That barrel staring up at me looked like a black hole, and for a split second, I thought that might be the last thing I ever saw. His eyes locked on mine, wild and restless, and his finger hovered far too close to the trigger. "Who the hell are you?" he barked, voice low and ragged. "This ain't no place for you." I kept my bow in one hand, but slowly lifted the other, showing him I was not looking for a fight. "Easy there," I said, steady as I could manage. "I'm just hunting deer with my buddy, not trying to bother anybody." Inside, though, my gut was twisting. We were miles from help. Cell service came and went, and this fellow looked like a man with nothing left to lose. He stepped closer, rifle still trained on me, and asked where my friend was. His lips curved into a smile, but it was the kind that sent a chill crawling down your back. "These woods swallow people," he muttered. "You ever hear the stories? Folks go in, and they do not come out." Before I could think up a reply, I caught the sound of a bowstring stretching. My buddy had drawn his bow from his stand, arrow aimed dead at the man's ribs. His voice carried sharp and firm, the tone he used as a cop. "Drop the rifle now!" The stranger's head whipped to the side, and I saw a flicker of surprise in his hollow eyes. For a moment, time seemed stuck. Then, slow and deliberate, he lowered the gun and set it on the dirt. "You got me," he said with a sneer that dripped with sarcasm. "But you boys don't have a clue what you're stepping into." We did not waste time. We clambered down from our stands, handguns out and ready. I kept mine trained on him while my buddy secured his wrists with zip ties we carried for emergencies. "What's that supposed to mean?" I asked. The man gave a low chuckle, breath foul with old smoke and something metallic. "Accidents happen in woods like these. People vanish. You will see." We started marching him back toward the truck, about a half-mile hike through heavy brush. He did not resist much, but he kept glancing over his shoulder like he expected something or someone to be following. At one point he stopped and stared straight into my eyes. "You think tying me up changes anything?" he whispered. "There's always more out here." His words dug into me, and though I kept moving, the hairs on my neck stood stiff. When we finally reached the truck, I managed to get just enough signal on my phone to call the game warden. Less than an hour later, a warden we both knew arrived. He was a big man, tough as hickory, and once he had the stranger cuffed proper, he ran his identification. I will never forget the way the color drained out of his face. "Boys, you just picked up a big one," he said. "This man's wanted for 2 killings. Stabbed a fellow in Louisiana, strangled his own cousin over money in Kentucky, been running for months." The weight of it sank in as the stranger stood silent, head down. No more sneers. The warden took him away, and later we heard he was sentenced to life without parole. My friend and I returned to our stands that afternoon, tried to shake it off, and even managed to tag a couple of deer. But the woods did not feel the same after that. Ever since, when I sit in a stand and hear a twig snap or see a shadow shift, I wonder if men like him are still out there, hiding just beyond the tree line. It makes a hunter think twice. Back when I wore a deputy's badge in Grays Harbor County, Washington, I saw plenty of rough cases, but nothing rattled me like what happened out in the Wenoosh Valley. That stretch of land was nothing but thick timber, twisting rivers, and swampy ground, where a man could disappear if he wanted to. Folks went there to hunt elk or escape the world for a while. And then there was John Torno. Everyone in town knew of him. He was a giant of a man, built like an ox, with a beard so heavy it made him look more beast than human. He lived out in the brush, mostly alone, hunting his food with a Winchester rifle he carried like it was a part of him. People said he was odd, maybe even touched in the head, but they figured he was harmless. That was the story until things turned ugly. It all started when the Bauer family reported their twin boys missing. Will and John, both 19, had gone hunting near the Satsop River. They were good boys, raised right, and knew their way around the woods. After 2 nights without word, their father came into the sheriff's office. His voice shook as he held his hat tight in his hands. "Deputy Quimby, something's wrong," he said. "Those boys wouldn't just vanish. They know the woods too well." I promised him we would find them. Next morning, I pulled together a search party. Myself, a couple of seasoned trappers named Louis Blair and Charles Lathrop, and the boy's uncle Fred Torno, John's own brother. Fred was a quiet man, but as we made our way through the brush, he spoke up. "John's been acting strange lately," he said low, almost to himself, "ever since they let him out of that asylum. He loves these woods more than people, but he'd never hurt family. Would he?" I did not answer. The truth was, I was not sure. The trail ahead kept me focused. Ferns brushed our knees, and fallen logs made us climb more than walk. Hours later, we found the boys' camp. Their packs were scattered like they had left in a rush, the fire pit still smoldering. "Look here," Louis said, pointing to the ground. Boot prints, big ones, led away from the site. We followed them through damp earth until the air itself began to stink. It was a sour, rotten smell mixed with the swamp. My gut sank as we pushed deeper. Then we saw them. Will and John lay face down near a creek, each with one neat bullet hole in the chest. No fight, no chance to run, just dead where they fell. Charles whispered a prayer, his face pale. Fred dropped to his knees beside the bodies, his voice breaking. John? He couldn't. But the signs told us otherwise. The boot tracks matched John's size. A spent casing from a Winchester lay close by. The truth settled heavy. Their own uncle had killed them. Word spread fast back in town. Nobody knew why. Some believed John thought they were poachers cutting into his territory. Others said his mind had turned sour with paranoia, seeing enemies in every shadow. A lawyer out of Aberdeen, Gordon Godfrey, later speculated the boys might have been sent to talk John into returning home, and maybe he snapped. Nobody could say for sure. The sheriff wasted no time. We gathered a posse of 20 men, rifles in hand, hounds ready, and went into those woods. "Stay sharp," the sheriff warned. "He's a crack shot." For days we scoured the valley. We found crude shelters John had built from branches, piles of elk bones where he had eaten, but no sign of him. Nights were the hardest. Around the campfire, every twig snap made my hand grip my revolver. "You hear that?" Louis would mutter, scanning the darkness. "Just the wind," I told him, though I was not convinced myself. John Torno had vanished into the forest, and the land itself seemed to guard him. The months rolled on, and with them the fear in our county only grew. Loggers stopped cutting in the valley. Hunters stayed clear. John Torno became more than a man in folks' minds. He turned into a ghost story. Parents told their kids to stay out of the woods, and men in town whispered about him like he was some wild creature instead of flesh and blood. Then came February of 1912. Louis Blair and his trapping partner stumbled across fresh tracks near an old cabin site. The fire pit was still warm. "It's him," Louis told me, his eyes shining with grim certainty. Another posse was raised. This time we had Deputy Colin Mackenzie and Game Warden Al Elmer leading the charge. Both were hard men, used to the backcountry, steady with a rifle. Colin told me before heading out, "We'll smoke him out, he can't hide forever." But forever was shorter than we thought. They never came back. A week later, we found their shallow grave. Both men stripped of their rifles, boots and coats, shot multiple times. John's work, without a doubt. The sight of their bodies, men I had shared meals with, men with families, lit a fire of anger in every one of us. The county posted a reward, $3,000, dead or alive. By 1913, the hunt had stretched more than a year. Louis and Charles, who had known the Bower boys, were obsessed with bringing Torno down. "We're going in deep," Louis told me one cold morning. "We'll take the dogs. He won't get away this time." So I joined them, along with a few others. The hike was brutal, miles of swamp and thickets, mud clinging to our boots. We barely spoke, saving breath for the chase. "If we see him," Charles muttered, "don't hesitate. He's not the John we knew anymore." On April 16th, the dogs picked up his scent. They howled and pulled us forward, deeper into the dark brush. Then, without warning, shots cracked from the trees. Charles dropped first, hit in the side. "I'm hit!" he gasped, falling to the mud. Louis fired back, but another bullet slammed into his chest. He crumpled where he stood. I dove behind a fallen log, heart pounding so loud I could barely hear. Through the leaves, I spotted him. John. But he was hardly the man I remembered. His hair hung long and filthy, his beard tangled like roots, and his eyes burned with something wild, something not quite human anymore. He crouched low, rifle raised, movements sharp and animal-like. "John!" I shouted, voice shaking but loud enough to carry. "It's over, lay it down." He did not answer. He just squeezed off a shot that splintered the log above my head. I returned fire, grazing his shoulder, but he kept on, relentless. For minutes we traded shots in the shadows, the air thick with smoke and gunpowder. Finally, he made a mistake. He leaned just far enough, and I saw my opening. I aimed and pulled the trigger. The bullet struck true, and John staggered before collapsing into the ferns. When the gunfire stopped, the silence was deafening. I crawled out and went to my fallen friends. Louis was gone. Charles still breathed faintly, but faded before we could carry him far. 3 bodies left the woods that day: Louis, Charles, and John Torno himself. Back in Montesano, the morgue was swarmed. Folks pressed in to see the body of the man who had haunted them for so long. Some came out of curiosity, others just to believe it was really over. His brother Fred stood over him, shaking his head. "I'm glad it's done," he said quietly. "Better this way." But as I looked at that lifeless face, I felt no peace. I kept thinking about those Bower boys, about Colin and Al, about Louis and Charles, and I kept asking myself, was it pure evil that drove John? Or was it the wilderness itself, grinding him down until the man became something closer to a shadow, a creature of the timber? Even now, when I hear the wind in those trees, I remember the way his eyes looked at me in that final instant, wild, raging, and lonely all at once, and I cannot help but wonder what else the woods might be hiding. Alaska has always had a way of testing men. The land is wild, endless, and unforgiving. Out there, you learn quick who you can trust and who you cannot. Back in the late 1970s and early 1980s, I was guiding hunts for caribou and moose near Anchorage, and that is where I first crossed paths with a fellow named Robert Hansen. At first glance, he did not look like much. Short, quiet, soft-spoken, with thick glasses and a shy way about him. He ran a little bakery in town and seemed the type more likely to spend his evenings icing donuts than trekking through the tundra. But when he booked hunts, I noticed something odd about him. He knew his way around a rifle, handled himself in the brush, and always asked to go deeper into the remote country than most clients dared. One trip in particular still sticks with me. We flew out in a bush plane and landed near a gravel bar along the Knik River. The air was sharp, snow not far off, and the only sound was the wind pushing through the spruce trees. Hansen kept quiet most of the time, but when we spotted a herd of caribou in the distance, I saw a different side of him. His eyes lit up in a way that made me uneasy, like he was not just after meat or a trophy rack. There was something darker in that look. I brushed it off at the time. Hunters get a rush when the moment comes, and I figured maybe he was just a little too eager. We spent days out there tracking, glassing ridgelines, cooking over small fires. Hansen was polite enough, though he had a habit of wandering from camp on his own, claiming he wanted to scout ahead. I remember telling him, "You go too far without me. You will get turned around out here. The land swallows men whole." He just gave a small smile and said he knew his way. It was not until years later that the truth came crashing down. Anchorage police arrested Hansen in 1983, and the news spread fast as wildfire. Turns out the quiet baker I had guided was one of the most dangerous men Alaska had ever known. He had been kidnapping women, flying them out into the bush, and then hunting them like game. They found graves along the Knik and Matanuska rivers, shallow pits where he had left his victims. The same gravel bars and valleys where we had camped, the same ridges where we had glassed for caribou. Those were his killing grounds. When I heard it, I felt sick. I thought back to the way he watched the horizon through his scope, steady as stone. The way he smiled to himself while walking back into the trees alone. It all made sense in a way that chilled me to the bone. The police said he confessed to killing 17 women, though some folks believed the number was higher. He drew maps of where he had buried them, as if it were some kind of twisted hunting log. That ordinary-looking man, the one who bought flour by the pound and shook your hand at the bakery counter, was a monster hiding in plain sight. To this day, I think about those hunts. I think about the firelight reflecting off his glasses, about how normal he seemed when he asked me about flight routes and remote valleys, and I cannot help but wonder, had I looked closer, had I trusted my gut about that strange feeling in my stomach, could some of those women have been saved? Out there in the Alaskan wilderness, the land already holds enough danger. Storms, bears, freezing rivers. But men like Robert Hansen, they remind you that sometimes the darkest predator in the wild walks on two legs. When the truth about Robert Hansen finally came out, it shook all of Anchorage to its core. Folks could not believe it. Here was a man who seemed ordinary as a paperclip, a baker, a father, a quiet neighbor who waved from his truck. Yet all along, he was carrying out something so twisted it hardly seemed real. The investigation started when one young woman managed to escape. She was tough as nails and brave enough to go to the police. She told them how Hansen had chained her up, flown her out into the wilderness, and planned to let her run before hunting her down. Her story matched the whispers that had been floating around about women vanishing in Anchorage. At last, the law had something solid to work with. The troopers put surveillance on him, watched his every move, and soon got a search warrant. What they found in his house made every Hunter ES blood run cold. Maps with little marks on them, like a trapper's journal, only these did not track animals. Each mark was a grave site. They dug where the maps pointed, and sure enough, they began pulling bodies from the soil. I remember sitting at the bar when the radio crackled with the report. My glass of whiskey went untouched as I just stared at the wood grain of the counter. I thought about the trips I had taken with him. The campsites, the ridges, the long silences, those were not just hunts to him, those were rehearsals. When Hansen stood in court in 1984, he looked the same as ever, small, quiet, shoulders slightly hunched, no wild eyes, no raging temper, just a man who could have been your neighbor waiting in line at the post office. That was the part that unsettled me most. Evil does not always roar, sometimes it whispers. The judge sentenced him to 461 years without parole. 461 years. It was a number meant not just to lock him away, but to stamp out any chance of hope. He died in prison in 2014, and good riddance, but his ghost lingers in Alaska all the same. Guides like me talk about it when the fire burns low and the wind whistles through the spruce. Newcomers think we're just spinning yarns to scare them, but we are not. We are reminding each other that sometimes the man who seems the weakest, the quietest, can be carrying the darkest hunger of all. I think about those women, each with a name, a story, a family that still misses them. They never asked to be hunted. They never deserved to die out there, alone in the cold. I think about the fear they must have felt, running through the brush with Hansen behind them, rifle in hand. That thought never leaves me, and still, I think about myself. I think about the chance I had to maybe notice something sooner, to speak up. Maybe it would not have changed a thing, but that question sits heavy on my shoulders. What if? Alaska teaches you to respect her. The storms, the rivers, the bears, but Robert Hansen taught me something else. He showed me that the wildest part of the wilderness is not the land at all. It is the human heart when it goes rotten, and that is a lesson I will carry until my last breath. Back in the late 1960s, I was living in Washington State, not far from the Columbia River Gorge. Folks around there always told stories about something roaming the timber. Some called it Sasquatch, some called it Bigfoot, but everyone had a tale, and you could not spend much time in Skamania County without hearing whispers about it. Now, most of us figured it was just campfire talk, a way to spook kids or pass time on rainy nights. But in 1969, everything changed. The county commissioners decided to take the legend serious enough to make it law. They passed an ordinance saying it was against the law to shoot or kill Sasquatch, and not just a fine either. They made it a felony, same as murder. When word spread, some folks laughed their heads off. "Imagine that," my buddy Earl said, shaking his beer. "They are protecting a fairy tale." But others, well, they nodded along. Hunters had been coming back from the woods with stories of footprints bigger than dinner plates. Hikers swore they heard screams in the night that did not sound like any animal they knew. A few even claimed to have seen a tall, shaggy figure moving through the trees. The county's thinking was pretty simple. If this creature was out there, even if it was only one, it deserved protection. And if it was not real, well, at least the law might stop hot-headed hunters from firing at every shadow in the timber. They said it was partly about safety too. Too many folks were getting jumpy, pulling triggers at the first sign of movement. I remember one meeting down at the courthouse when an old logger stood up and said, "You might laugh, but I seen it. Tall as two men, covered in hair, walking like you and me. You think I'm going to let some fool from out of county shoot it dead? Not on my watch." The room went quiet after that. The ordinance drew attention from all over. Newspapers came in from Seattle, Portland, even California. Reporters scribbled notes, while locals swapped their best Sasquatch stories. Some treated it like a joke. But to us who lived in those woods, it felt different. It was part pride, part superstition, and part plain old caution. I will admit, even though I had never seen anything myself, I felt a little safer knowing the law was on the books. Something about it just made sense, that maybe there are things in the forest we do not fully understand. And until we do, it is better not to go blasting away at shadows. Every time I walked the timber after that, I caught myself listening closer. A branch snapping, an echo rolling through the gorge, the smell of damp earth. It all seemed heavier somehow, like maybe someone was out there watching me. And in Skamania County, we all knew who that someone might be. By the time the 1980s rolled around, that first Sasquatch law from 1969 had started to look a little too strict on paper. Charging somebody with a felony for shooting at something that might not even exist made lawyers scratch their heads. So in 1984, the county commissioners updated it. They softened it a bit, turning it into a misdemeanor instead of a felony. But here is the thing, even with that change, the message stayed the same. Skamania County was serious about protecting Sasquatch. To this day, if you are out there in those woods and take a shot at one, you are looking at a fine and maybe even some jail time. It is not just a funny little law anymore. It has become part of the culture. Part of what makes that corner of Washington unique. Tourists still come from all over hoping to catch a glimpse. The gift shops sell mugs and t-shirts with big hairy footprints on them. The locals still tell stories about strange calls echoing through the trees at night, or about a shadow too tall and too broad to be any man. And even if you have never seen a thing, just walking through those forests, you feel the weight of it. The air is heavy, the moss hangs thick, and sometimes you catch yourself turning around just to make sure you are not being followed. I've walked those woods plenty, and I can tell you this, whether Sasquatch is real or not, the legend is alive. The lore itself almost feels like a line drawn in the dirt. It says, "We respect the mystery." And out there, that respect means something. Some people laugh, others roll their eyes, but deep down I think folks understand. Maybe we need stories like this. Maybe we need to believe there is still something wild out there that science has not pinned down. Something bigger than us moving through the trees. So the next time you find yourself near the Columbia River Gorge, take a drive through Skamania County. Read the sign at the courthouse, walk the trails, listen close when the wind runs through the pines. Who knows what you might hear? And if you enjoyed this story, do me a favor. Hit that like button, subscribe to my channel, and stick around. I have plenty more tales to tell, and you will not want to miss the next one.